Hey everyone, Tactics here, and in this video we're going to focus strictly on the most important interrupts you're going to face in the War Within Season 3, sorted by dungeon so you can easily navigate for what you're looking for. If this is useful, please do subscribe to the channel. It's free to do and it really does help me out. Otherwise, no fluff. Let's get into it, starting with the returning Ara-Kara. So right off the bat, there is a spam caster in the trailing attendants. They have bolts that you're going to be wanting to put all your spare interrupts on, but for the main interrupt, it is Resonant Barrage, which channels for group damage. This is a channel, so it can be CC'd as well, but with the school being changed to match that of Web Bolt, it's not a big deal if you interrupt this either. The other major interrupt here comes from one of the mini bosses in Ixen. It's the first one you're going to face, and he's got Horrifying Shrill. This will fear everyone, so you want to keep that interrupt and assign one kick to that. This guy also spams bolts, so spare kicks into those bolts if possible, but some of these are going to go through, especially if you pull it with an attendant. Other than that, the only other kicks in this first area are from the Attic mini boss, and this got a poison bolt on the tank. Lowest priority because this is specifically tank targeted and it can actually be dispelled. Moving forward past the first boss, you've got web mages, which have that same web bolt cast, but they also have a new priority cast in Revolting Volley, which will put up poison on your entire group. So again, make sure one person is assigned to interrupt every single one of those. Moving on to the second boss, this guy will also intermittently summon web mages, but their cast here is Silken Restraint, which will target a random player. You can interrupt it before the cast goes off, but if the cast is successful, it is a channel, so then again you can use ACC if needed. Moving towards the final boss, you've got Blood Overseers, who have an AoE ability similar to the web mages we just mentioned in Venom Volley, so make sure every single one of those is kicked. Otherwise, the only other important interrupt is on the final boss. The blood workers that run around when hit drop a puddle. If you stand in that puddle, which you'll need to do to avoid the pull-in effect, you'll be rooted by a slime mob, and you can use an interrupt or CC this slime to break that root. So be ready to do that after that explosion goes off, because you'll need to dodge some of the webs on the ground. Continuing on with Dawnbreaker, this is a pretty heavy bolt dungeon. To start, you got random target bolts from the Nightfall Shadow Mages, and then you have tank targeted bolts from the Sureki Web Mages, so prioritize the Night Bolts. Web bolts are secondary. The first boss has a tank bolt as well in Shadow Bolt, which has been buffed this season, so you do want to keep a kick rotation on that. Moving down into the city, there's Nightfall Darkcasters, and these guys will channel Tormenting Beam into random targets, so again, kicks or CCs do work on this cast since it's a channel. Otherwise, there's no new kicks in this area until you get to the second boss, who will occasionally summon a bunch of animated shadows, which will just try and cast Congealed Darkness at random players. Because there's so many of them, you don't have enough kicks usually, so use things like interrupts on some of these early casts or AoE CCs to chain interrupt these mobs until you can cleave them down. And then you just have Roshanon, who has the Acidic Eruption cast immediately after landing in Phase 2. That brings us to Operation Floodgate, where to start, there's not a ton of bolts, but there are a lot of assign one interrupt to this mob kind of abilities. So you've got the Venture Co. Surveyors and their Surveying Beam. This is a random target channel, which also leaves puddles on the ground. Heavy damage here, so interrupt or use a CC on that. The Mechadrone Snipers have the Trick Shot ability. This is an attack on a random target that then explodes and hits other players nearby. Not super scary on its own, but with other stuff going on in a pack, it can lead to some really dangerous situations, so keep a kick on that. Ventrico Divers are the other interrupt in this area, and they will harpoon a random player, pulling them in, which is potentially scary because they also drop bombs, but also applying a really nasty bleed to that player. This interrupt and the other interrupts we just mentioned here are kind of a little bit too fast for range kicks to necessarily get all of them, so do keep that in mind when you are assigning players to interrupt. The shorter range kicks, like a mage kick for example, might be fine, but other ones may not come back in time. The only other kick in this area is the spam blood bolt from the Darkfuse Bloodwarper. This only does target your tank, but it is pretty hefty, so if you have spare kicks, you want to put it into that. Other than that, we've got the first boss in Big Mama, who will summon Darkfuse Mechadrones, and these guys occasionally cast Maximum Distortion. You will want to make sure you kick every single one of this, because there's a pretty hefty amount of damage to your group and pushes everyone back, which is very annoying on that boss fight. Before fighting Swamp Face, there are a bunch of disturbed kelp mobs, and these guys will occasionally try and heal themselves with restorative algae, so make sure you interrupt that, and if you do miss it, you can use purges to clear that magic hot. Moving down into the power plant, there is one new interrupt mob in the Ventrico Electricians, and these guys just lightning bolt random players, so keep interrupts on those. Then we can talk about Priory, which is an extremely bolt heavy dungeon. All throughout this first area, you have priests, as well as conjurers, which do a variety of like smite casts, fireball casts. Some mini bosses do this as well. So there's a lot of interrupts to be had in terms of reducing your group damage because of how many bolts there are. Outside of the bolts, the devout priests also have a greater heal ability, which obviously is very bad if it goes into one of these like lieutenant mobs or mini bosses. So you want to make sure that gets interrupted. Otherwise, it just interrupts on the first boss themselves with the battle cry cast, which will buff both him and the lieutenant that he is fighting with, so make sure that never goes off. Similarly, going into the second boss, no new interrupts here, just those same bolts, but the boss himself has Burning Light, which is a big group hit and a self-heal, so you want to make sure that gets interrupted every single time. Moving up into the final boss area, there's a lot of Risen Mages. These guys have that same Fireball random target hit, but they also have a Fireball volley attack, so you want to make sure one kick is saved per Risen Mage to interrupt that volley. From there, we can talk about the brand new dungeon Ecodome Aldani, which is actually extremely light on interrupts. So right at the start of the dungeon, you've got a bunch of overgorged mites, and these guys will attempt to gorge random players. This deals a random hit of damage, but it also grants a stack to the mob, which on death, they explode and they apply a dot to your group based on those stacks. So it's really, really important to make sure you interrupt as many of these as possible. Otherwise, when they die, you could be in for a world of pain. Moving past the first boss, Wastelander Farstalkers have the Arcing Zap ability occasionally, which is basically an arcane chain lightning ability. So you want to make sure that stays interrupted. Otherwise, all your spare interrupts are going to go into the random target arcane bolt from the Wastelander Ritualist. Moving forward, there's really not a lot of kicks left in the dungeon, with only one new mob in the Pack Speaker appearing after the second boss. And again, they just have arcane bolt once again. So you keep putting kicks into that random target hit. Very, very light, as I mentioned, which is an interesting design decision. Moving on, Halls of Atonement, which has a mix of bolts, channeled, and other various important kicks. So starting off, the Depraved Collector's Siphon Life ability is a channeled interrupt, so you can interrupt it, but I actually recommend saving your interrupts on this ability, instead using stuns to stop the cast. Instead, put those interrupts into the Depraved Houndmaster and their Loyal Beast cast, as this will enrage nearby Gargans, which is very bad for your tank. All spare interrupts should be put into the Wicked Bolt ability from the Depraved Obliterator. Back in Shadowlands, this targeted the tank, but it currently appears on the PTR that this is randomly targeting players. Not sure if it's a bug or intended, but if this is random target, it is quite dangerous, so you definitely want to make sure you're kicking a lot of these. Moving forward, nothing new between the first and the second boss. On the second boss, though, the Undying Stone Fiends that get summoned will attempt to cast Villainous Bolt on their aggro target. This is a little bit scary initially when they first spawn, because often DPS players or healers are going to get aggro, so be ready with interrupts initially, or even CCs, to cause them to retarget and give the tank a little bit more time to get aggro so that targets them. This is also still very scary for tanks if all 6 are casting at the same time, so again, make sure that doesn't happen if possible. Skipping ahead to the third boss, High Adjudicator Elise, there's a tank targeted bolt again, an Anima Bolt, so just keep a kick rotation on this. And similarly, the mini boss following this guy, an Inquisitor Cigar, also has a tank targeted Wicked Bolt ability, so just keep a rotation on that. Finally, we can hop into the Tazavesh Mega Dungeons, starting with Streets, where there is a lot to talk about. First off, the Support Officer, they have a tank-targeted bolt, so a lot of your spare kicks want to go into that. And they also have the Hard Light Barrier, which puts up an Absorb Shield on a random mob. This is a magic shield, so if you have the ability to purge in your group, you can save the kick and use it on that bolt instead to reduce tank damage and just purge that shield off. The mini boss in this first area also has an interrupt, Portalmancer Zohan, and that is Empowered Glyph of Restraint. If this kick goes off, it puts a nasty magic dot and slow on your entire group, so you always want to make sure one kick is assigned to this. Moving beyond into the next area, going left towards the Menagerie, are Ancient Corehounds, and these guys have the Ancient Dread ability, which will curse your entire group, reducing cast and attack speed by a very significant amount. So you really want to make sure, again, one kick assigned to each Corehound. Never let this cast go off. If you went right instead, there are Cartel Wise Guys, which continue with that tank-targeted bolt, but there's no really other competing kicks in this area, so just put all of your kicks to lower that tank damage. Moving into Miza's Oasis, those bolts make a return, but they're now random targets, so you want to use spare kicks and CCs on that, because there is a more important interrupt in Menacing Shout, which comes from the security mobs, as well as Zogron, the boss himself, that will do a hit and an interrupt on your group, which is quite bad, so make sure one person is assigned to each of those mobs, and everything again spare into those bolts. Zogron has an additional kick as well in Final Warning. He throws up a giant absorb shield, and you need to kind of break it in time and interrupt this 20-second cast. So someone who's not assigned to kicking the Menacing Shout should be interrupting that. And if it is going to go off, in case you're like pooling damage or you just can't break the shield, you can survive this large individual hit just by popping some group defensives and personals, and hopefully you will live. Moving forward into the mailroom, the overloaded mail elemental has the spam filter ability. This is another one of those interrupts that is also a magic buff. So you can just purge it, but there's also no other interrupts in the mailroom besides this ability. So you might as well just interrupt it and save the purge GCD. Moving into the center just before the final boss are the veteran spark casters, probably the most dangerous caster in the area. First, they have Scintillate, which is a spam random target cast that also debuffs players with a magic debuff that causes them to take more arcane damage. Of course, the hit also does arcane damage, but that's not the really scary part. It's their Hyperlight Salvo, which is a random target channeled ability, which deals a ton of arcane damage. So you want to use as many kicks as possible on the Scintillates. If some go through, healers try and dispel that debuff, and then you want to use CCs to stop that Hyperlight Salvo ability ASAP, because again, ideally you should be spending all your kicks on Scintillate. If you kick Hyperlight Salvo, it's still fine, but there is so many kicks with these mobs that it is better to prioritize stops on that instead. Finally, the last boss in Soazmi has the double technique ability. They'll just teleport away somewhere and begin casting this. It does require 2 interrupts to actually prevent this ability. You'll kick it initially, and then there'll be a second cast based on where you kicked it on the first cast. So you can milk that second cast specifically, especially. Just make sure, again, 2 people need to be kicking this guy in order to prevent that from going off. Moving on to part 2 in Gambit, we of course have some random target bolters. The Fishmancers and their water bolt will hit random players. Spare interrupts into that. Priority interrupts into Murkbrine Shell Crushers and their cry of Murgle Gurgle Gurgle. I don't know, man. It's a Murloc. It'll enrage all the nearby Murlocs. It'll increase their damage done by 50%, and that is very bad for not just your tank, but also because those Fishmancers are dealing random target damage. So again, that's the priority. Water bolts are secondary. On the first boss, he'll spawn Vault Purifiers, and these guys will do a random target bolt as well in Valorous Bolt, so keep interrupts on that. Otherwise, moving forward, there's actually just a lot of tank bolts. So in the second area, there's the Hourglass Tide Sages. Their Brackish Bolt is specifically a tank bolt, and then the Focused Ritualists at the end of the dungeon also have a tank bolt and Hyperlight Bolt. Spare kicks into that one though, because they also have the Unstable Rift Cast, which is a pretty large AoE group hit. So priority kicks on that, 1 person per ritualist, and then spare kicks into that tank bolt. Just be careful, depending on how big you pull here, tanks may be taking a lot of bolt damage because there's quite a few of these ritualists in this area. Finally, we have the last boss, Solea, who will occasionally summon Socartel Assassins in the first phase of the fight, and these mobs occasionally blink away and cast Shuriken Blitz, so assign 1 person to kick each to prevent that bleed from going out. There we have it, guys. That is all the important spells that you should be interrupting across the entirety of Season 3. If you learned something, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more great content, including route walkthroughs to help you start the season out correctly, normal, heroic, and mythic raid guides, and much more. Of course, none of this would be possible without all of my amazing Patreon, so shout out to you guys. Otherwise, thanks to everyone for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.